Good afternoon, everyone. So, for this meeting, we're going to talk about the culture of patient safety. And in order to illustrate various concepts in this topic, we have 11 vignettes for this. No? Starting with this first one. This first one is entitled A Husband's Worst Nightmare. So, this vignette will try to explain to you the foundation for understanding the culture of patient safety. So, this is the case of Helen. Helen is a 50-year-old woman who arrived at the ER with chest pain. So, ang isipin mo dyan, di ba? Ang gusto mong i-rule out, myocardial infarction. Her husband Bob informed the resident they were on an anniversary trip when the pain started. So, just for Helen's past history, she is a chronic smoker, 1 pack per day for 20 years, with a history of type 2 diabetes mellitus and hypertension. Kahit nga meron na siyang chronic conditions na to, inconsistent niya yung kanyang pag-take ng medications. So, she has no recent primary care physician visit. So, hindi pa nagpa-follow up sa doktor niya. So, initially, EKG and troponins were unremarkable. So, mukha namang stable. So, because of that, she was admitted to the telemetry floor for observation, and a stress test was scheduled for the next morning. So, what happened next to Helen? So overnight, her serum troponins began to rise, indicating heart muscle damage. Nalala niyo pa ba sa biochemistry or sa histology kung ano yung troponins? These are regulatory proteins found in skeletal as well as in cardiac muscle. So pag tumaas yung serum troponin levels, it means merong damage to the heart. So bakit ba nada-damage kapag merong ischemia or infarction? No? Yan. So, pag naubusan ng oxygen supply, yung muscles of the heart, doon sila masisira, mamamatay, at magre-release ng troponin to the blood. So, yun pa lang, yun na yung first sign na hindi normal yung nangyayari sa kanya. Inatake na siguro siya sa puso. Okay, next. The resident working a 36-hour shift did not follow up on the lab results. Siguro yung isip niya, naresetahan naman na niya, tapos niya nang i-chart, hindi siya maghahabol noong lab results. And yung mga kasama niya, ano naman ginawa? So there was a newly joined nurse. However, the nurse, kasi baguhan pa lang, was intimidated by the attending physician. And because of this, the nurse failed to communicate the abnormal lab results. Also, there was a morning nurse, but the morning nurse was busy, caring for 10 patients. So the nurse just assumed the resident was aware, and they didn't clarify further. Also, the lab personnel missed the abnormal troponins because the resident's notes were incomplete. So, pinasa niya sa laboratory, wala naman doon yung history niya. No? So, baka nakalagay doon, trop I. Hindi naman sinabi kung para saan. Although, medyo obvious na kung para saan yun. Pero, inisip naman kasi nung lab personnel na hindi naman nila alam na nakaschedule siya for stress test. Kasi iba naman gagawa nun, di ba? Iba naman nakaschedule sa laboratory, iba naman nasa cardiac lab. Okay? So, tragically, when Helen was taken for the stress test, she went into cardiac arrest and passed away despite resuscitation efforts. Ano ba yung cardiac stress test? Normally kasi ginagawa doon, nagpo-place ng stress. No? Ano yung stress na yun? Usually yung stress na yun is exercise. So, usually pinapag-treadmill, no? Yung pasyente. Tapos titingnan doon kung ano yung effect noon sa heart niya. So, ang nangyari, nakapagpalala pa yung lalo, no? Sa cardiac condition ni Helen. Okay? So, yun. So, ano ba yung pagkakamali doon? Tingnan natin in the next few slides. So, according to a recent study by Johns Hopkins, more than 250,000 or 250,000 deaths per year are due to medical error in the US alone. If you were to place preventable adverse events on the US CDC ranking of leading causes of death, it would fall as third leading cause of death. So, after lang siya ng heart disease as well as cancer. Back to our vignette. So, ano yung hina-highlight na problems doon? It provides insight on how miscommunication, overworked staff, a poorly designed electronic health record, as well as inadequate documentation, dagdag mo pa yung patriarchal culture, as well as a lack of culture of patient safety that led to patient harm. But ano nga ba yung patient safety culture model? It has 4 components: organizational culture, patient safety culture, patient safety climate, and individual belief. So first, what's organizational culture? It's the collection of core beliefs, attitudes, values, norms, and behavioral characteristics shared by individuals within an organization. Next, what's patient safety culture? It's the result of a combination of individual and group norms, values, attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions that determine the level of commitment an organization has for health and safety. Third component is patient safety climate. It's the shared beliefs, attitudes, and perceptions of an organization toward the practices and processes by which patient safety is managed. And lastly, individual belief is the attitude and perception of an individual within an organization toward patient safety. It's important to have a patient safety culture in the hospital. So, patients shouldn't have to worry about the quality of care that they are going to receive. So, ano ba yung 3 pillars of a reliable safety culture? There's trust, reporting, and improvement. Coworkers should exhibit mutual trust by reporting errors and potential dangers, fostering a safe environment for both staff and patients. So, dapat tiwala yung mga magkakatrabaho na hindi naman yon ang pag nagkaroon ng error, hindi na, ang goal naman nun is hindi para ilaglag yung isa't isa. It's actually to help each other improve. Next is reporting. Reporting errors create opportunities for the organization to learn, grow, and identify systemic issues. So, yun yung first step. Kumbaga, yun yung bare minimum na kailangan para mag-improve. Okay? So, for improvement, lastly, the cycle of trust and reporting should ultimately lead to improvement in patient outcome. So itong ginagawa nating patient safety culture, hindi lang siya para sa patient, para din siya sa healthcare professionals. Kasi meron tayong tinatawag na second victim syndrome. So kung meron nangyaring preventable error, yung pangalawang victim nun, aside from the patient, is the healthcare worker themselves because they could be traumatized by the event. So when a medical professional is traumatized by their involvement in a preventable adverse event, they are referred to as the second victim. So they may be racked with guilt. Diba? So research suggests that almost 1 in 7 medical professionals fit this description. So it's very likely that you could be a second victim in the future. So, a staggering 68% of second victims reported receiving no institutional support. So, parang tinanggap na lang na at one point in your medical career, you're going to cause preventable errors. And wala nang tutulong sa'yo nun kundi ang sarili mo lang. But the strongest safety cultures support not only their patients, but also their staff through these traumatic events. So, dapat siguro merong counseling or support group for doctors who have, or any other healthcare professional who was involved in these preventable errors. For our next clinical vignette, ito na yung kinakatakot ng mga nasa operating room. The title of this vignette is A Big No-No. So this vignette discusses a case where a patient developed complications due to a surgical sponge left behind after a procedure. We will explore how principles from aviation, paglipad ng aeroplano, can improve patient safety in the operating room. Nabanggit ko na nga ito sa inyo before, no first meeting pa lang natin that sa aviation, mas safe pa ang pagsakay mo sa aeroplano kaysa yung pag-drive papunta sa airport. So, more likely kang mamatay doon sa pag-drive papunta airport kaysa doon sa actual aeroplano itself. Because the aviation industry is really a pioneer in safety. Okay? Tingnan natin kung ano mangyayari sa case na to. So this is the case of Violet, a 25-year-old woman who underwent a successful appendectomy for acute appendicitis and was discharged. Kung hindi pa kasi kayo familiar sa operating room, lagi silang OC, magbilang ng mga sponges and gauze na ginagamit during surgery. Kasi ayaw nila makaiwan yan sa pasyente. However, what happened to Violet? Normal na sana. But 4 months later, she returned to the ER with pain and fever. And the CT scan revealed a mass and an abscess in the same area. So, magtataka siguro sila noon, bakit lumala pa? Tinanggal yung appendix. Yun lang naman dapat yung magperform ng inflammation doon sa lugar na yon, sa area na yon. So, because of that, an exploratory laparotomy was performed. So, binuksan ulit yung pasyente. And a surgical sponge was discovered and removed from her abdominal cavity. So, nangyari, yung naiwan na sponge became a nidus for infection. And yun na nga yung naging abscess later on. Yung isang aral na makuha natin sa aviation industry is the power of checklists. So, sa aviation kasi there are 2 types of checklist. Normal checklist or emergency checklist. So, yung normal checklist, these are for routine and emergent tasks where a process might be interrupted or it's too long to recall from memory. Time is not a critical factor in this case. So kapag gano'n, yung mga kailangan gawin sa isang flight, no, naka-checklist yan. However, kapag urgent situation, kapag kailangan umaksyon agad, meron tayo tinatawag na emergency checklists. And under no emergency checklist, meron pa tayong dalawa pang types further. Yung isa, boldface. Yung isa, non-boldface. So kapag sinabing boldface, ito yung tipong babagsak yung eroplano kapag hindi nila nagawa properly. So boldface items require immediate action from memory. So hindi ka na dapat nakatingin pa sa checklist. So yun dapat yung sa ulado ng nasa eroplano. So ang katumbas niya sa atin, parang CPR or yung Advanced Cardiac Life Support or ACLS, no, sa hospital. While yung non-boldface flowcharts, they are used to guide complex decisions when time is less constricted. So pwede mo pa rin tignan yung kailangan mo magagawa mo. But it just so happen na emergency na rin yun. So para maiwasan yung errors in the operating room, meron tayong tinatawag na Universal Protocol. So, sa Universal Protocol, kung nakapag-rotate na kayo sa operating room, kung naging nurse kayo before, so it's a standardized process including a pre-procedure verification and a timeout before surgery. So kinocall yan ng nurse, no, bago mag-start ng unang hiwa. So ang kino-confirm doon, correct ba yung patient, correct ba yung site, and procedure. So magugulat kayo, no? Minsan talagang merong nagkakamali pa ng whether left or right yung tinatanggal, no? So nangyari na yan before. So it's not unheard of. And of course, hindi naman kasi familiar yung surgeon minsan doon sa patient na nakahiga doon sa kama. Minsan natatapan na yung muka, no? So talagang important to confirm yung identity ng pasyente. Okay? And the patient should also be actively involved. So bago siya anesthetize, kino-confirm na siya, no? Kung yun ba talaga ang pangalan niya. Okay? Aside from that, meron din tinatawag na Association of Perioperative Registered Nurses or AORN checklist for surgical items. No? So, your circulating nurse should have a meticulous count of sponges, sharps, and instruments before, during, and after the procedure to ensure na walang matitira. Kasi saan ba most likely may maiiwan kung merong maiiwan na gamit doon? Diba? Most likely it's going to be inside the patient. So even yung mga Kelly, mga forceps, pati yung mga blade, dapat yan bilang na bilang. Vignette number 3 called Alice in Wonderland. This one is about overwork. So mararanasan nyo yan for sure, especially kung nag-residency kayo. Tingnan natin kung na-experience ng ating fatigued resident. So to illustrate this case, let's look at the case of Mr. Clark. Mr. Clark is a 30-year-old male with a history of alcohol abuse and seizures. He was brought to the ER after a fall from the second floor of their house. So nahulog siya mula sa second floor ng bahay. However, ang tumingin sa kanya is an exhausted resident in his 23rd hour of the shift. So ang ginawa ng resident, based on the history and initial labs, the diagnosis of alcohol withdrawal seizure was made and the patient was admitted. Kasi, ito kasing si Mr. Clark is a chronic alcohol abuser. Tapos 4 days na sisulas niya ang drink. So, ang ginawang management sa kanya ng resident, binigyan lang ng IV thiamine para to improve yung sensation. Hindi niya nakompleto yung physical examination. So, what happened? This is a case actually of missed diagnosis. So, the next morning, Mr. Clark was found with acute urinary retention and paraplegia. So, neurologic yung kanyang symptoms. An MRI confirms spinal cord compression. A simple back and neurological exam in the ER, which was missed due to fatigue, could have revealed the diagnosis earlier. Ma-realize ninyo kasi yan sa mga physical examination modules natin later on na yung neurological exam is one of the lengthiest portions of the physical exam. So baka itong si resident, dahil fatigue na nga at overwork na, hindi na kinumpleto yung kanyang physical examination. And because of this, he missed the diagnosis that could have easily been prevented. Sana kung nakita niya dun sa physical examination na meron pala sigurong fracture or dun sa likuran, no? Baka naman naisugod pa siya sa surgery, no? For emergency surgery. So there. But technically, what's fatigue? Fatigue is lack of energy, enthusiasm, and deficiency at the workplace. So this could impact the performance of healthcare workers in the hospital. So, operationally, paano mini-measure yung fatigue? So we have the Maslach Burnout Inventory, which is a 15-minute survey comprising of 22 items. No? So there. So they are just not just negative feelings, they have very real impact in the occurrence of medical errors. So what are the factors that contribute to burnout? Nandiyan na sa figure, no? Excess workload, sobrang dami pero mag-isa ka lang sa duty or dalawa lang kayo. Next is frequent night shifts. Laging puyat yung schedule ng mga doktor. Minsan alternate na time na lang sa natutulog, di ba? Alternate na gabi na lang natutulog. Third, underlying medical conditions. So, pwede yung depression, anxiety ng mga medical residents that could be contributory to their fatigue and burnout. Fourth, sleep deprivation. Fifth, insufficient break time. No? Minsan minamasama pa ng mga seniors kapag kumakain yung mga juniors nila. No? And lastly, extended work shifts. Yan nga yung nabanggit natin, yung pre-duty and from system. So, resident burnout is bad not just for the resident but also for the patients na inaalagaan nila. Ano ba yung impacts kasi nun sa residents? First, there's personality changes and irritability. So, if you look at some of the residents in the hospital, mukha na silang galit sa mundo, no? Galit na sila sa kahit anong maliit na bagay. And next would be cognitive impairment and short attention span. Related din yan sa sleepiness, no? Meron naman tayong tools to measure sleepiness, yung Stanford Sleepiness Scale, for example, and yung Epworth Sleepiness Scale. And lastly, residents are at increased risk of accidents and needle stick injury. So halimbawa, yung mga pauwi na from duty na more than 24 hours, no? Minsan magdadrive pa sila, napipikit na sila, no? Marami akong kalala ng mga residents na nakakwento nila na halos mapikit-pikit na sila nung nagdadrive sila pauwi. And lastly, and of course, yung mga needle stick injuries. Minsan hindi siya question of skill. Yung, di ba? Kasi sa public hospitals especially, yung mga resident din, sila rin usually ang tagakuha ng dugo. Tapos, hindi naman siya question of skill na magkakaroon ka ng needle stick injury. Minsan sobrang puwet mo lang talaga, mamamali ka ng tusok, no? Okay. And lastly, and next, aside from the impact on the patients, on the residents, it also has an impact on patient care. With burned out na residents, there's an increased risk of medication errors. There's also a chance of misinterpretation of lab reports, no? Medyo amazing nga yung ibang residents natin, no? Kahit puwet na, kahit napipikit na, naiintindihan pa rin nila yung mga nakalagay na lab results. Of course, there's also problems during handoffs, lalo pag nagmamadali ng mag-endorse ng pasyente. And eventually, there's a sense of depersonalization and lack of empathy. Depersonalization, para pinapanood mo na lang yung sarili mo na kumikilos, no? Hindi mo na napag-iisipan yung ginagawa mo. And ang worst na part pa doon is eventually, baka mawala na ng pake yung residents, no? Yung mawala yung fire that initially lit their enthusiasm to go into the medical profession. So, anong solusyon to combat resident fatigue? Dapat lang ba limitahan yung duty hours? Pag wala bang 24 hours, masosolve na lahat ng problema? Actually, there's an ongoing debate. Kasi nga, nabanggit ko na, no, sa US, merong ACGME work hour restrictions. Hindi na pwede yung sobrang habang mga duty na parang nakatira ka na sa ospital. And to some extent, ginagaya yan for residents and for interns and clerks dito sa Pilipinas. So because of this, it sparked an ongoing debate. Maaari nga na-improve niya yung resident well-being, but ibig sabihin ba nito, magta-translate ba ito necessarily to better patient outcomes? While there are conflicting study results. At isa nga lagi pinapoint out dyan is that dahil mas maiksi ang duty hours, mas madalas din ang handoffs, yung mga endorsements. Kailangan magpapalit-palit yung madadaanan ng patient. And because of that, some people argue that this led to a disruption in the continuity of care. So, the increase in handoffs may create new risks. However, meron namang solusyon dyan, di ba? Ang solusyon dyan is yung mga nabanggit na natin earlier sa discussion natin ng system errors. Siguro pwedeng mayroong standardized checklist, and eventually naman kasi, hindi rin kasanay masyado yung mga doctors sa mga endorsements kasi nangyari lang yan sa simula at dulo ng duty nila, no? So siguro kapag mas dumalas na yung endorsements, yung handoffs, eventually magta-train better yung mga doktor. So what are some strategies to mitigate fatigue? Number 1, provide mandatory education on fatigue management. So pwede na siyang incorporate sa curriculum, katulad ng ginagawa natin ngayon. Number 2, encourage strategic napping and adequate breaks, no? So dapat siguro hindi na masamain kapag pag merong nap time, yung residents. Yung iba namang residents, meron silang parang alternating system. So, kunyari, dalawa sila sa duty. Yung gagawin ng isa, mag-isa lang muna siya. Tapos yung isa tulog muna. No? Tapos parang hatiin nila yung duty hours nila. Third, implement standardized handoff procedures to reduce communication errors. So something as low cost and low tech as a checklist could make a huge difference in making endorsements. Third, fourth pala, ensure schedules to allow for proper recovery from night shifts. Well, syempre kakibat niyan, yun dapat mayroong adequate staffing. Number 5, promote exercise, meditation, and mindfulness programs. Next, establish robust peer support systems and helplines. And lastly, you could use burnout assessment tools. Katulad ngayon sinasabi ko, yung Maslach Burnout Inventory, isang survey tool to monitor staff well-being. Next case, number 4, entitled A Doctor's Curse. This one looks at the consequences of failing to practice proper hand hygiene. So, simpleng hand washing lang have huge consequences in our patient's health. In this case, it was the occurrence of a highly infectious organism, the opportunistic organism, Clostridium difficile. So, the case of Mrs. Huckabee. Mrs. Huckabee is a 70-year-old nursing home resident brought to the emergency room with fever and diarrhea. 2 other residents from the same facility were admitted with identical symptoms. Ito kasi si Mrs. Huckabee has long-standing type 2 diabetes mellitus. So siya ay immunocompromised. All 3 patients recall being examined by the same on-call physician who had rushed from the hospital and who did not use gloves. That physician had been working on the hospital floor with active C. difficile precautions. All 3 patients were subsequently diagnosed with Clostridium difficile infection. So important yan, no? So, tayong doctors, we are not immune from from transmitting these infectious diseases. Dapat nga mas maingat tayo dahil tayo ay na-expose first-hand sa patients, diba? So, there. Take note kasi na ang C. difficile, kakaiba siya in the sense that hindi effective sa kanya yung alcohol-based hand sanitizers. Diba usually kadalas sinasabi yan, halimbawa nung SARS-CoV-2 pandemic or nung COVID-19 pandemic, diba sinasabi na kapag hindi makapaghugas ng kamay, pwede ng alcohol-based sanitizers, pero in C. difficile, that's not enough. It's not effective in killing C. difficile spores. Kasi kung matatandaan ninyo, no, yung genera niya, yung Clostridium, ibig sabihin nun siya isang spore-forming microorganism. Okay, so, paano proper precautions if you have patients with C. diff? You should use gloves and gowns. Also, dedicate or clean shared equipment. So, bawal yung sharing, no? Yung ideally sana, kung stethoscope mo, gagamitin mo sa sunod na pasyente, dapat i-disinfect mo muna. And lastly, upon leaving the room, remove gown and gloves. Critically, you should wash your hands with soap and water. Yan kasi mga detergents, they are very good in disrupting cellular membranes because of their amphipathic nature. Okay? So, the simple physician's lack of adherence to this specific protocol likely led to the transmission of the infection to 3 vulnerable patients. Okay? So, as doctors, we should have humility in still following hospital protocols. And din naman, yung mga nurses halimbawa, should not be intimidated by doctors, kahit consultants pa yon, no? We could remind doctors that proper hand washing is critical. So, pero paano ba mapapa-improve ang isang process like hand washing in the hospital? Let me introduce to you the Donabedian model for quality improvement. So, who is Donabedian? Isa lang siyang person na nag-propose nitong framework na to, no? Ay nasabi lang sa Donabedian model, if you want to improve something, you have to look into 3 things: outcome, process, and structure. So, sa hand washing, ano ba yung tatlong yon? So, sa structure, meron bang availability of resources? Meron bang lababo? May sabon ba yung lababo na yon? And kung walang sabon at tubig, meron bang sanitizer? And of course, education din. Nare-remind ba yung mga healthcare workers sa importance ng hand washing? Number 2, process. How about the actual practice of hand hygiene? Compliance and correct technique. Nasusunod ba? Paano ba yung klase ng paghuhugas na ginagawa? Nasusunod ba yung dapat na makakanta ka pa ng happy birthday? No? 2 minutes ba yung paghuhugas mo? O yung minadali lang? And lastly, outcome. There could be measurable outcomes such as reduced infection rates as well as lower costs stemming from the avoidance of infections. For our next case, it's called the real price of smoking. So kung kanina hand washing, ngayon ang discuss naman natin ay patient falls, no? Kasi kinakatakot at pwedeng ikamatay din talaga ng mga pasyente. Kaya nga yung simple pagtataas ng handrails, ng guardrails sa gilid ng kama, napakahalaga nun, no? So let's look at this case. Mr. Clarkson is an 85-year-old male with a history of syncope and falls. And marami na rin siyang long-standing cardiac conditions. He is post-MI and post-CABG, no? So post-myocardial infarction, post-coronary artery bypass graft. He is admitted for cardiac monitoring. He is a chronic smoker who is able to go through 1.5 packs per day. He insists on going outside to smoke every hour, refusing a nicotine patch. Bawal nga naman kasi manigarilyo habang naka-admit, di ba? Unfortunately, the staff allows this, partly to maintain a patient-generated post-discharge ratings. Natakot kasi silang ma-rate ng mababa, no? Baka magalit sa kanila yung pasyente. So, ano nangyari? Eventually, on the third day, while going out to smoke unaccompanied, he trips, falls, and fractures his hip. So, dapat yung stay niya na para lang for cardiac monitoring, nagtagal pa, lumala dahil kailangang operahan for his hip. Yan. So, sige. So, what are falls? Di pagkahulog, no? So, in English, unintended descent, causing the patient to strike another surface, no? So, is it a crucial part of healthcare? Yes, because around 700,000 to 1 million falls in the US hospitals occur annually. And a sizable number of this, specifically 35%, result in injury. And approximately 11,000 falls are fatal, especially for the elderly. Aside from that, aside of course from the patient impact, it's also associated with higher economic costs because this would lengthen hospital stay by around 6.3 days. And depende kung naka-admit ka pa sa magandang hospital, di ba? Every day, ang laki nun. Ang malaking difference nun. So the cost is approximately $14,000 per serious injury. And it leads to patient fear and loss of confidence. So meron kasi tayong tinatawag na fall cycle. Ang nangyari doon, yung patient na fall, na nalaglag, na tumba, nagkakaroon ng anxiety. So, hindi siya lalong gagalaw. Because of that, meron kasi tayo tinatawag sa rehab med na use it or lose it. In other words, kapag yung muscle mo hindi mo ginagamit, lalo siyang mag-atrophy. So, because of that, lalo mahihina, lalong papangit ang coordination and leads to another fall ulit. Until manghina na manghina yung pasyente. So, that's the fall cycle. What are the things that you could do to prevent falls? So in fall precaution, meron tayong tinatawag na 5 P's. So this is an excellent strategy for hourly rounding. In other words, habang nag-rounds ka during your duty, pwedeng every 2 hours, gawin mo tong 5 P's na to. This is more for nursing. But aralin na rin natin, no? So ano yung 5 P's na yon? The first P stands for pain. Assess the patient's pain level and provide medication if needed. So isa naman sa mga dahilan kung bakit nababalisa or hindi mapakali yung mga pasyente is because merong masakit sa kanila. So you could provide pain medication as needed. Next, personal needs. Offer help with toileting, nutrition, and hydration. So, simple lang. Tanong mo lang sa patient, kailangan nyo po ba mag-CR? Kailangan nyo po ba ng bedpan? Naiihi po ba kayo? Kailangan bang palitan ng diaper? So, those simple things. For nutrition and hydration, kung halimbawa hindi naman intubated, kung hindi naman NPO, you could try to bring closer yung food niya, malapit sa kanya, para hindi niya kailangan abutin. Kasi yun naman usually cause ng falls, di ba? Kapag pabangon-bangon sa kama. Next, position. Help the patient get into a comfortable position or turn them to maintain skin integrity. Important yan for bed sores as well, no? And, so, hindi naman natin iniiwasan lang completely yung movement. Okay din naman may movement, no? Basta mahalaga lang, well-assisted yung mga patients natin doon. Fourth, placement. Ensure that critical items like the call light, phone, and water are within easy reach. No? So, dapat yung nandun lang sa table, katabi ng bed nila. Lastly, prevent falls. Remind the patient and family to use the call light for assistance for getting up. Kasi minsan, yung matanda yung patient, tapos yung bantay niya, matanda rin na asawa niya, no? So, baka pareho pa silang ma-fall sa ganung lagay. So, let's inculcate it sa patients natin na pwede naman sila humingi ng tulong kung sakali. Vignette number 6 is titled A Rainy Night. So this time, ang error is diagnostic imaging na reading kasi hindi siya nabasa properly by the attending physician. So this is a critical problem, especially in public hospitals. Sa public hospitals kasi, meron tayong tinatawag na wet read. Unofficial reading lang yon, usually done by juniors. So usually mga residents or fellows. Kasi yung consultants, kadalasan yung reading nila several months away pa from the actual reading. So wala nang point na hintayin yon, no? So yon. Tingnan natin nga kung ano yung mangyari dito sa case na to. Let's look out now at the case of Catherine. Catherine is a 34-year-old female brought to the ER with altered mental status after a party. A drug screen is positive for methamphetamines and heroin. A non-conscious CT of the brain was read by a radiology resident as having no acute changes except for possible artifacts. Yun na nga, na-wet read siya ng radio resident. The patient is diagnosed with toxic metabolic encephalopathy. So inisip kasi nila, because of yung madaming drugs na tinake ng patient, baka yun yung cause, no, ng kanyang altered mental sensation. So, over the next 12 hours, Catherine's condition declines, she becomes mute and unable to move her extremities. A start MRI was done and it revealed a pontine hemorrhage. A retrospective review of the initial CT showed that the hemorrhage was present but was misinterpreted as an artifact. Okay, so because of this, the patient ultimately died. So what are the causes of radiological errors? Well, of course, madami yan. We could divide them into two, reader-specific and system-specific causes. For reader-specific causes, it could include perceptual errors such as failing to see an abnormality. Yan kasing radiology, hindi naman kasi yan siya absolute na interpretation, no? Na parang may algorithm na pag ito nakita mo, ito na agad yung diagnosis. Sometimes it's subjective. Specifically, yung mga tinatawag natin na user-dependent. Katulad niyan yung ultrasound. User-dependent yon kasi depende kung paano yung pagkakuha mo ng image, magbabago talaga yung interpretation mo. Next is faulty reasoning. Seeing an abnormality but misinterpreting its cause. As I have mentioned, subjective nga. So parang sila rin, tulad ng clinician, meron din clinical eye na masasabi, no? Sa kanila naman radiologic eye siguro. Kasi kailangan nilang ipaliwanag, bigyan ng pangalan, no? Bigyan ng diagnosis yung kanilang makikita. Next is poor communication, failing to report a finding effectively. Halimbawa niyan yung, kasi diba yung clinician at yung radiologist, hindi naman nag-uusap face to face eh. Nakita lang yan dun sa kanilang interpretation, dun sa radiologic report. E minsan, kapag maligoy yung radiologist, pwede nakalagay doon, to consider ganito, ganyan. Ayaw mag-commit ng actual na sakit. Kapag ganyan nangyari, minsan, baka naman hindi siya ma-actionan ng clinician. And lastly, of course, fatigue and burnout. Hindi porket nakaupo yung radiologist sa kanilang reading room, hindi na sila napapagod. Of course, long hours pa din yon. Yung hours nun pang doktor pa rin, no? Eh, meron din silang duty hours din naman. And of course, kapag mas mahirap nga yon kasi in a way, hindi lang siya automatic, no? Kailangan nilang pag-isipan yung diagnosis nila. Okay. Next, let's move on to system-specific causes. Inadequate clinical info, lack of context for the scan. Yan pa yung problema minsan kasi kapag naggagawa ka ng request sa radiology, meron kasi ang form na finifill up. And to be honest, nakatamad yun fill upan kasi mahaba siya. But important sana yon kasi the clinical information is important to come up with a proper radiologic diagnosis. Next is poor image quality. Technical issues could obscure findings. Yun yung tinatawag nating artifacts. Minsan, halimbawa sa MRI kasi mabagal yan eh. Mabagal yung ikot niyan, unlike CT scan. So yung MRI, kapag gumalaw lang yung pasyente, may motion artifact na yon. Kapag naman sa chest x-ray, pag hindi lang huminga ng malalim, yung pasyente, hindi siya huminga enough. No? Pangit na rin yung result nun. Tawag doon, poor inspiratory effort. Okay. And sa mga radtech din naman, kailangan din lang ng tamang skill sa positioning. Kasi standardized yung mga positioning yan. Kapag mali yung positioning mo, malilito yung radiologist. Or baka kailangan pang ipaulit dun sa radtech. Third, excess workload. There may be a pressure to read too many scans too quickly. And lastly, no access to priors. Inability to compare with previous studies. Important kasi sa radiology, yung comparison niyan. Halimbawa, meron kang tumor. Titingnan yan over several follow-ups. Kung nag-i-improve ba, nagre-respond ba sa chemotherapy. Eh, paano kapag hindi computerized yung system mo? Paano kapag plates pa? Ang hirap na compare, di ba? Mahirap i-compare yung measurements. So there. Yun yung mga possible causes of radiologic errors. Next, we're going to look at the strategies to prevent them. So here they are. First, compile a don't miss diagnosis list for critical findings. So ito yung mga life-threatening na sa condition na dapat hindi mo ma-miss sa diagnosis kapag nandoon na. Halimbawa yan yung mga stroke, diba? Ano pa, yung mga aortic dissection. Yan, kasi pag hindi mo naagapan yan, pag hindi mo nakita yan, patay talaga yung pasyente. Next, use automated screening checklist to review blind spots on imaging studies. Ganun din, no? Katulad ng mga lecture natin on handoffs. Kung meron ka sana standardized list, wala ka nang makakalimutan. Sunod, establish standard protocols for communicating abnormal findings to the ordering provider para mas madali rin maintindihan ng clinician kung ano ibig sabihin ng mga findings na yon. Integrate electronic medical records and picture archiving and communication systems, yung tinatawag na PACS, for better access to clinical data. Kaya sinasabi ko, mga computerized records, no? Para madali na lang balikan kung meron bang yung progress ng pasyente, no? Halimbawa, may pneumonia siya, nag-improve ba doon sa antibiotic or not? Madali may kita yon kung meron kang PACS. Also, encourage discussion between ordering providers and radiologists when discrepancies exist. Minsan kasi, no, na-offend yung ibang radiologist kapag nilalapitan sila ng clinician. Yun. Kaya dapat lang naman, merong clear na motivation kapag lalapit yung clinician sa radiologist. Meron bang gusto i-clarify na diagnosis? Hindi mo naman sinasabing gusto mong pabalitan yung basa ng radiologist kasi wala ka namang karapatan doon, no? Pero, important na meron kang motivation, and that motivation would be to clarify the diagnosis. Also, establish safety nets with clear follow-up systems for uncertain diagnosis. So, halimbawa, mahirap basahin, mahirap maintindihan. Meron bang way na i-refer siya to someone more knowledgeable? Halimbawa, yung nag-subspecialize sa ganitong organ system. Baka pwede ba siyang i-consult doon? Utilize second reading by specialists when clinically indicated. Yun nga, yung referral system, di ba? And lastly, promote a culture of safety and blame-free continuous learning. Kasi even if mga specialist na yan, kahit mga expert na yan sa CT, MRI, of course, meron pa rin yang space for learning. The next vignette is entitled Customer Service 101. So hospitals need to be profitable para masustain yung operations nila. But sometimes, this goal for profitability means na sunod-sunuran na lang sila sa customer or sa patient satisfaction. Eh, sa health naman syempre, hindi naman pwedeng dapat happy lang lagi yung pasyente. Kasi minsan, yung happiness nila goes against what's good for them, di ba? So, let's look at this. This demonstrates the potential dangers of prioritizing patient satisfaction over evidence-based patient safety. Specifically, right here, I'm going to introduce to you the concept of polypharmacy. Pag sinabing polypharmacy, marami, more than 6 medications ni reseta para lang sa isang pasyente. And may danger yon, di ba? Kasi that will lead to the higher risk or probability of having drug interactions. Let's look at the case of Pamela. Pamela is a 66-year-old woman with anxiety, osteoporosis, and fibromyalgia. She was admitted after a car accident with a fractured arm. Because of this, she was given an opioid analgesic, hydrocodone, for the pain. Upon review, she is already on a cocktail of medications known to cause cognitive impairment, especially in the elderly. So, opiate, yun nga sinasabi nating hydrocodone. Tapos, she was also on a tricyclic antidepressant, amitriptyline halimbawa. And also, she's on a benzodiazepine for anxiety, basta po lang, lorazepam. And finally, antihistamine. So, lahat na yata nakakaantok na medication, ininom niya na. So, shortly after admission, she requested to go to smoke. The nurse permits it and offers assistance, which Pamela declines. When walking, Pamela falls and sustains a subdural hematoma. So, that's the danger of having multiple medications at once. So, pwede mag-add up yung kanilang effects, especially if same yung side effects nila or even the main effect. So, in this case, lahat ng gamot niya nakakaantok to some extent. Lahat siya sedative hypnotic of some sort. Because of that, nagkaroon siya ng discoordination, and yun, eventually natumba, and nagkaroon siya ng hematoma. So this case illustrates the concept of polypharmacy. As I have mentioned, benzodiazepines, antihistamines, TCAs, or tricyclic antidepressants, and opioids could all cause sleepiness, no? Sa madaling salita. And another thing about drug interactions is that mas at risk yung mga elderly. So dapat nga mas nag-ingat sila na sa pagre-reseta ng mga gamot na to kay Pamela, no? All of these classes of medications should be used with extreme caution in patients over 65. Another thing, this case illustrates the importance of balancing patient satisfaction and patient safety kasi minsan magkatunggali sila. So in hospitals or businesses, the trend of prioritizing patient satisfaction to increase profitability has been associated with greater inpatient stays, increased healthcare expenditure, and even increased mortality. In other words, kapag lagi nasusunod yung gusto ng pasyente, minsan mas nakakasama pa yon, no? And there's evidence for that. Ito nga yung nasabi natin statistic, di ba? Minsan mas nagtatagas lalo sa ospital, nagtatranslate sa mas mataas na gastos. The focus should shift from improving patients' experience through care coordination, patient engagement, and evidence-based safety protocols. At the end of the day, we should resort to evidence-based because we are following evidence-based medicine. A safe patient is ultimately a more satisfied patient. So kahit initially hindi maganda para sa kanya, no? Parang mapait na gamot lang 'yan, no? Kahit initially aayawan ng pasyente, in the long run, yun yung makabuti kasi para sa kanila. Our next vignette is entitled The Empty Crash Cart. So this time, we're looking at a case of cardiac arrest where a fatal error occurred due to an unprepared crash cart. Kasi dapat yan yung mga bagay na dapat nasa ward ay laging ready, laging handa. So this emphasizes the need for meticulous preparation and team training for emergency codes. So this time, the case of Kathleen, she's a 36-year-old dialysis patient. So hindi hemodialysis siya, dinadialysis siya every 3 times a week. So she arrives at the emergency department with weakness and chest tightness. Her EKG showed widened QRS complexes, tall T waves, and if you see this in your electrocardiogram, you should suspect hyperkalemia. In other words, mataas yung potassium. Baka kasi kulang yung kanyang dialysis, no? So during administration of calcium gluconate, she went into cardiac arrest. Specifically, yung rhythm niya is ventricular fibrillation. Matututunan nyo later on, ventricular fibrillation is what we call a shockable rhythm. In other words, kailangan lang ng gamitan ng defibrillator. Because of that, a code blue is called. However, anong nangyari? A newly hired cart nurse brings a crash cart that is being restocked. No? So pagtingin niya, walang electrodes doon sa defibrillator. So ginawa niya, umalis siya, pero by the time na nakabalik siya, and by the time that she was able to retrieve a fully equipped cart, the patient's rhythm is no longer shockable. No? Baka asystole na. Baka flatline na. And because of that, she is pronounced dead. What this case emphasizes is the importance of improving code blue response. No? Cardiopulmonary arrests are time-sensitive situations where teamwork and adherence to guidelines are vital. Isa sa mga pinaka-aaralin nyo sigurong guidelines during your stay in the hospital, yung ACLS or Advanced Cardiac Life Support. So the time to resuscitation is the single most important factor for survival. So kapag tumagal, mas mataas yung chance. Every second mahalaga, no? Kasi habang tumatagal, tumataas yung chance na mamamatay yung pasyente because of code blue. Okay? So training is key. That's why we have ACLS training. Meron na doon pinaprovide na algorithm. But how could we improve retention nung learning na yon? We could do simulation education. Meron tayong tinatawag na mock codes. Mock codes, these are the most effective methods of simulation because they recreate the stress of a real event and help identify potential errors in a safe environment. Kasi nga naman, it's one thing to learn about the algorithm from a lecture or from a book. Pero while you're there, kapag nakita mo na yung patient mo na hindi na humihinga, doon mo ma-realize kung gaano ba talaga kahalaga or gaano ka halaga na dapat natutunan mo yung step by step. No? Yung step by step na hindi mo na iniisip, ginagawa mo na lang siya automatically. And another thing that's important to emphasize is crash cart readiness. All the medications and supplies there in the crash cart should be immediately available. Isa pa yan na may standardized checklist naman. So lahat ng crash cart sa isang ospital, dapat may listahan ng ganitong mga gamot. Dapat hindi mauubos. Okay? And this also important that the defibrillators there are already fully assembled. Oxygen should be ready and all drawers should be properly stocked and organized according to the standard protocol. Another thing that's important, yung mga tinatawag nating non-technical skills. So it's one thing to know technically what should be done, and it's another thing to make your team be able to do it. So tinan natin kung ano ba yung mga task na yan. Kasama dyan yung task management, teamwork, as well as situational awareness. So for task management, you should plan and prepare. So halimbawa, nakita mo na nag-unstable na yung patient, then you should call out na we need to oxygenate. So mga ganung bagay ba? So in other words, kailangan bina-verbalize ng team leader yung kanyang thoughts, no? At kaya niyang mag-mobilize specifically ng mga tao kung sino yung gagawa nun. Meron pa nga yan tinuturo na dapat daw, kapag magbibigay ka ng utos, no? Dapat ituturo mo directly, sasabihin mo by name, yung kung sino yung inuutusan mo, para merong accountability, para hindi kayo nakatunga nga lang doon sa patient na naghihingalo. Later on, matutunan nyo yan, no? Next would be prioritize. Meron nga tayong tinatawag na ABCs, di ba? Airway, breathing, and circulation. And next, use resources effectively. Okay. Next is teamwork. You should coordinate activities, exchange information clearly, and the team leader should use authority and assertiveness. Lastly, situational awareness. For that, the team leader should be able to gather information. So actually, yung team leader naman during a code blue, hindi naman siya dapat yung taga-compress, no? Kasi dapat, the team leader should be able to stand back and assess the things that should be done. So dapat nakita niya kung tama ba yung adequacy of chest compressions being given, tama ba yung depth and yung rate ng chest compressions. Tapos yung rescue breaths ba, na ibibigay din ng tama. Halimbawa, kung na-intubate na yung pasyente, tapos nag-aambubag na, tama ba yung rate? Kasi pag masyadong mabilis naman, pwede pumutok yung lungs ng patient. Okay? So, the team leader should be able to recognize and understand changes as well as to anticipate future needs. So, halimbawa, na-anticipate niya na kailangan na ng ganitong medication. Dapat iutos niya na. Dapat nag-iisip siya loudly. No? So, I think this patient needs ganitong medications, several cc's of this drug. Dapat yon masabi na agad sa nurse. No? So, there. Those are the non-technical skills of doing a code blue. Last 3 vignettes, konti na lang to. So this time is entitled A Punch in the Face. This time we're going to discuss a serious issue of workplace violence in healthcare, as well as paano ba mag-manage nung pasyente nag-aamok. No? Tingnan natin kung paano. So this is the case of Mr. John. John is a 28-year-old male brought to the ER by friends with severe agitation, vomiting, and confusion after taking an unknown substance at a party. So as a nurse attempts to administer medication, the patient suddenly becomes violent, disregards his IV line, and physically attacks the nurse. Security is alerted, the patient is placed at 4-point restraints and sedated. His drug panel later comes back positive for phencyclidine. Ano ba yung phencyclidine? Phencyclidine is a hallucinogenic drug, no? So yan, it's a drug of abuse, no? So ang ma-encounter nyo sa Philippines most likely nakashabu, no? Tapos yan, may encounter nyo nag-aamok, overstimulated. So, ang question now is, ano ba yung tamang response kapag na-encounter kayo ng nag-aamok? Okay, tingnan natin. So, when managing the acutely violent patient, there are 3 types of restraints, no? But before doing any types of restraints, try mo muna mag-de-escalate. Attempt to calm the situation down by talking down. Okay? So, yan. Kasi even naman yung mga taong naka-drugs, minsan mapapakaisapan mo pa, no? At mapapaliwanagan mo pa. Okay, pag hindi tumalab yon, you could do the following things. First is environmental manipulation. Move the patient to a quiet individual room to decrease external stimuli. So, dali mo doon sa lugar na tahimik, tapos hindi iwan ng bantay niya, no? Kasi, ang tendency kasi among Filipinos, kapag mayroong nag-aamok or nagagalit, di ba, lalong aasarin, lalong kukutsain. So yun, lalong naka-trigger yun. So that's not good for an acutely violent patient. So yung mga pasyente nag-aamok, ilayo nyo sa mga tao na nanunokso sa kanila. Or pag sabihin nyo yung nanunokso, huwag nyo patulan. No? Kasi, for sure, meron something else yan na medically related na problem. Next would be chemical restraints. You could use rapid tranquilization such as mga fast-acting na benzodiazepines as well as antipsychotics to achieve behavioral control. And lastly, as a last resort kapag hindi tumalab lahat ng yon, you could finally put the patient on physical restraints. But with the caveat that minsan mas nakakasama sa patient yung physical restraints. So yung iba na mga stimulant abusers, kapag nirestrain mo sila, doon sila atakihin sa puso. So, yun lang, caution lang. Gagawin mo lang yan kapag more likely na makapanakit sila ng ibang tao Um, Yun. So, use 4-point or 5-point restraints to prevent danger to the patient or staff. So, 5-point, yung 4 na limbs, pati yung ulo. Okay. Management should begin with resuscitation and stabilization, followed by restraint and sedation to prevent injury to both the patient and healthcare personnel. But how about on an institutional level? Meron ba tayong magagawa? Well, meron tayong tinatawag na zero tolerance framework for workplace violence. Kasi hindi naman lahat ng workplace violence, secondary lang to substance use, di ba? Minsan, meron lang talaga mga threatening na individuals. So, in order to address that, we could do the following steps. First, promote respectful communication and mutual respect at all levels. Second, establish clear zero-tolerance policies defining unacceptable actions and their consequences. No? So, pwedeng yung kapag halimbawa yung patient or yung bantay niya nag-threaten na ng physical harm, ng bodily harm dun sa healthcare workers, then pwede tayo mag-establish ng rule na kapag ganoon, dapat escort na sila palabas ng ospital noong security. Third, foster personal accountability where every person is responsible for reporting and responding to incidents. 4. Provide evidence-based training on early recognition and de-escalation of potential violence. So yung simpleng pag-walk around lang, tapos pagsasabi din sa mga nakapila sa emergency room every 30 minutes na matitingnan din po kayo, mahaba lang po talaga ang pila. So yung simpleng acts katulad nun ay makatulong na to de-escalate the situation. Lastly, track outcome metrics such as patient staff safety scores and incidents of harm to measure program success. Okay? So ang in-illustrate lang ng point na to, hindi lang mga healthcare workers ang involved sa patient safety. Kasali rin dyan yung mga security personnel, diba? Pati mga orderlies kapag sa psychiatric ward naman. Second to the last case, this one is entitled, As the Kings, So Are the Subjects. So this time, we're looking at a fatal medical error that occurred due to systemic issues and a lack of leadership. So even the people at the highest ranks of administration should not be immune from patient safety issue concerns. If anything, dapat mas involved nga sila kasi mas malaki yung magagawa sana nila para sa mga pasyente. So let's look at the case. This is the case of Mrs. Julie. Mrs. Julie is a 45-year-old with severe asthma. She comes for a yearly follow-up. The physician prescribes her oral corticosteroids. Because the printer is located in a different room, the physician asks the nurse to collect the prescription and give it to the patient. So ito, maliit na bagay lang ha. Ang ugat lang ng problema is that yung printer nakalagay sa ibang kwarto kaysa doon sa kung saan nakasastay yung mga pasyente. Tapos, itong issue na to, na-bring up na ng nurse before sa kanilang clinic administrator. Pero, hindi nakinig yung administrator ng clinic. So, tingnan natin kung ano nangyari. The physician later receives a call that Mrs. Julie died from a severe asthma attack after taking propranolol, a beta blocker contraindicated in asthmatics. Nalala nyo ba kasi kung ano yung role ng beta blockers, di ba? Nagbabayo siya sa beta receptors, and meron tayong beta 2 receptors sa bronchi natin. Kapag yung beta blocker nag-work doon sa airways, mag-close up yon, di ba? So, ang nangyari pala kasi, the nurse had accidentally given her a prescription for a different patient. Nagkaroon lang ng mix-up. No? Simpleng bagay. The clinic director had previously ignored the chief nurse's complaints about the inefficient and hazard-prone layout. So, this case highlights the importance of leadership. And even if nasa highest positions na kayo ng leadership, yung mga maliliit na bagay is not beyond you. So, dapat nga yun yung mga ina-address mo. No? So, sige. Let's look at other leadership strategies for patient safety in the next slide. The culture of patient safety should start from the top. So, dapat yung mga leaders should be role models in not taking patient safety lightly, di ba? So, leadership should be actively involved in creating safe systems and promoting safety-conscious behaviors. So, ano ba yung maaaring magawa ng mga leaders? So, first would be executive walk-arounds. So, simple lang yan. Yung parang mag-ikot ka lang, no? Dun sa front lines. Tingnan mo lang kung ano yung nangyayari at the grounds. So, leaders should physically walk through clinical areas to engage with frontline staff about safety concerns. This will show commitment, foster trust, and support staff in addressing threats to safety. Next is team training. So, optimize teamwork processes like communication, cooperation, and leadership. Studies show that it would significantly improve staff perception of safety culture. And lastly, there are comprehensive unit-based safety programs or CUSPs. So you could pair team training with interventions like clinical care algorithms to improve patient safety culture and specific clinical practices. Last case for this meeting, we have Clinical Vignette 11, the encrypted message. So this one shows the dangers of medical abbreviations. So as much as possible, sa practice, we're trying to avoid na yung mga medical abbreviations. Unless of course, yung mga commonly and widely internationally accepted abbreviations. So tingnan natin. This is the case of Gordon. Gordon is a 74-year-old gentleman discharged from the ER after a fall and tibial plateau fracture. He is given a handwritten prescription for pain. So it reads MSO4, 2 milligrams per orem, every 4 hours, prorenata or as needed. So ano yung problem doon? Una pa lang, kita na kung ano yung glaring problem. It's MSO4. Ano ba yung M doon sa MSO4? Sige, ano ba yung mga possible interpretations dyan? So at his follow-up, Gordon reports being in extreme pain since discharge. The pharmacy had misinterpreted MSO4 as magnesium sulfate instead of morphine sulfate. So because of that, he was given a subtherapeutic dose of a magnesium supplement instead of a powerful painkiller. So buti na lang nangyari yan sa US kasi kung sa Pilipinas yan, in the first place, hindi na sana siya mabibigyan ng morphine sulfate kasi sa atin, isa siyang controlled drug. So sa atin, kailangan niya ng specific prescription pad called a yellow prescription. What else? Although, makarelate tayo doon sa issue nung abbreviations and the fact that the prescription was handwritten. Diba? Kasi that's one of the dangers in having handwritten prescriptions is that it is prone to misinterpretation. And actually, the Joint Commission has actually come up with an official list of abbreviations that should never ever be used, whether in handwritten or in electronic medical records. So, tingnan natin isa-isa. This includes U for unit. So, instead of using U, you should write the full word, unit. Ano ba yung risk kasi doon? Kasi the U usually gets mistaken for 0, or 4, or CC. So, imagine nyo na lang, kung 40 units yung gusto nyo isulat, pero ang interpret ng pharmacist, 400. O, diba? Times 10 agad yung mali na dose. Next would be IU, which stands for International Units. Ang problema naman doon, again, yung letter U. Kasi yung U, pwede mo mistake for V or 0. So, kapag ano nangyari, iisipin na baka IV or 10. Next, yung QD, QOD. Isama mo na rin siguro dyan yung QID. No? Yan kasi ang mga Latin phrases. Halimbawa, yung QID stands for Quater in Die, which means 4 times a day. Yung QD stands for every day, while yung QOD stands for every other day. So, di ba? Very confusing. Tapos, ang pinakaiba lang nila is yung letter sa gitna, di ba? Whether I, O, or wala. So, in order to remedy that, just write the full word. No? Next would be the trailing zero. For example, 4.0 milligrams. Ang problem doon, yung decimal point, usually namamali. Or madaling ma-miss, di ba? So, kapag yun, nagkamali, times 10 yung error sa dose. So, just write, wala nang 0.0. Kung ano lang yung actual dose. Okay? So, iba kasi yung practices sa basic sciences. Sa halimbawa sa chemistry, kasi di ba meron pa tayo tinatawag na significant figures. Lahat yon goes out of the window for concerns of patient safety. Just write yung actual number. Wala nang decimal point and wala nang 0 as placeholder. Also, take note naman, kapag yung 0 nasa unahan, you want it there. Kasi, to emphasize na merong decimal point. So dapat kapag isulat ka ng 0.4 mg sa limbawa, dapat merong 0. Kasi in that case, kapag wala yung 0, mas madaling ma-miss yung decimal point. Okay? And lastly, yung pinakita natin sa example natin, yung MS, MSO4, at MGSO4. isang napakalaking pagkakamali yung mapagpalit ang morphine and magnesium kasi sobrang makaiba sila ng activity. Yung isa for pain, di ba? Is one of the strongest analgesics out there. Okay, so just write the complete word for your prescriptions. So how do we stop the use of these dangerous abbreviations? Kasi kahit pinagbabawal na, dahil nga time saving din naman yung abbreviations to some extent, di ba? Mataas pa rin talagang rates of non-compliance with this. So what could we do? We could initiate hospital-wide campaigns to stop the use of abbreviations. So yung ibang consultant nagagalit na, no? Kapag maraming abbreviations na hindi sila naiintindihan sa chart, no? Next, post prohibited lists on ID badges, in charts, and on computer screensavers. Third, use peer-initiated accountability and rewards for non-usage. Fourth, educate all staff on the harmful effects of abbreviations. And lastly, utilize technology such as computerized physician order entry with hard stop alerts to prevent the use of dangerous abbreviations. So with the rise of electronic medical records naman, mapapadali na sana yung pagsusulat ng chart kasi pwede ka nang mag-copy-paste. However, sadly, sa ibang hospital, dinisable yung copy-paste systems. So, ang problema tuloy, ang hirap lalo mag-type and prone din sa typographical errors. So, there. Para lang aware kayo sa mga issues. And, so that's it for our lecture for today. I hope you remember all those 11 cases and the specific issues that were raised regarding each of them. So, kung may questions kayo, just email me. Thank you, everyone.